Resistance. It can look like a protest. Other times, it's simply carrying forward a story that others would rather forget. For some, resistance is a choice. For others, it's a birthright, a condition of living, a reflex shaped by exile, by the will to survive. Under pressure, resistance finds form. In poems, in banned pages passed from one reader to another, in paintings hung in a gallery or put on a street wall. In this episode, we reflect on the concept of resistance. How do artists confront systems that erase, suppress, or distort? How do they create meaning in spaces where truth is unstable or unwelcome? And how does the act of making itself become a kind of defiance? These are some of the questions we'll explore at the Edge of Reason. A limited series podcast produced by Atlantic Rethink, the Atlantic's creative marketing studio, in partnership with Hauser Wirth, a home to visionary modern and contemporary artists. Today we're joined by two masters of their craft, visual artist Firelei Báez and novelist and essayist Edwidge Danticat, both of whose works offer powerful meditations on resistance, its legacies, its emotional toll, and its imaginative force. Joining us first is Firelei Báez, the Dominican-born New York-based artist who is celebrated for her large-scale, intricately detailed paintings and paper works, and her immersive installations and bold sculpture. In pieces like Anacaona, Destroy the Beauty That Has Injured Me, and Wanderlust, Demanding Recompense, she depicts femme figures whose limbs bloom into wildflowers, exploding in saturated otherworldly color across faded colonial maps. Through her work, she reclaims erased histories while forging imaginative possibilities for diaspora, transformation, and resistance. Firelei, welcome to Edge of Reason.
I'm so happy to be here with you.
So this season, we're asking how artists engage with history to challenge or reinterpret or reshape the present and the future. In your work, resistance often feels both ancestral, timeless, and mythical. Just wanted to start by asking you, when you reflect on the word resistance, what comes up for you?
I think of resistance as a tool within our arsenal for navigating alignment or misalignment with the world around us. I feel like there are many legacies and cultures around the world, but the predominant one within a Western canon has always been of separation from Descartes and the enlightenment of mind over body, supremacy over certain spaces and beings. We've seen the full gamut of that. We see the trying to snap back into that mindset. And then we have other forms of being, other cultural legacies that allow you to see yourself as integral to many other parts of the world around you, not a supreme being. So resistance to me is the gift we have to be able to re-merge with something bigger than ourselves.
I love that you're thinking about and talking about resistance in terms of this really long period of time.
Yeah, I'm thinking pre-human, post-human. Those are things that we are but a mote in space. And there is this, maybe let's think of it in terms of a cherry blossom, a petal. I love the ethos around the cherry blossom season, that a perfect life lived is one where you bloom to your highest profusion and you're so in sync with cycles that you don't hold on tightly. You just let go at the height of bloom, and you're willing to acknowledge that you're part of a larger cycle and that you will perhaps bloom again, or you might become the earth that will feed the next bloom after you. But blooming and letting go, not being so attached that we don't let other things flourish around us. We have this image of resistance being the point of inflection, and I remember this beautiful lesson from the freedom fighters that not everyone was going to be in the front lines. Revolution required someone to set up the beds, to cook, to be able to do the things that was going to keep you whole. As a collective, the work that I'm making is that power boost that can help you re-anchor back in and face the world anew. I'm the cook in the background. I'm the person setting up the bed.
I love that. Let's bring in our guest, the acclaimed author Edwidge Danticat, whose fiction, nonfiction, and memoirs center themes of migration, political violence, life and death, and the bonds of family and memory. Raised between Haiti and Brooklyn, she's the author of 17 books and has long chronicled the complexities of migrant life and the quiet forms of defiance against authoritarianism that are embedded in acts of daily survival. In works like Brother, I'm Dying, which won the National Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction, and Create Dangerously, The Immigrant Artist at Work, she writes about exile, loss, and the courage of bearing witness. And, not incidentally, she teaches at Columbia University as the Winston Tom Mellon Professor of Humanities and African American and African Diaspora Studies. Edwidge, welcome to Edge of Reason.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You spent your childhood in Haiti, a country born of revolt. How has your personal experience as a migrant and as an American shaped your voice as a writer, as a witness, as a daughter of Haiti and the diaspora?
Well, it was wonderful to hear both you and Firelei talk about resistance as ancestral, resistance as lineage, because coming from Haiti, a place born out of revolution, that's sort of always been part of our visions of ourselves, even as Haiti is going through very difficult times right now. When you think of resistance in terms of even like the original founding of both the indigenous population of Quisqueya, now called Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So that's always been part of our storytelling, our view of ourselves, that resistance is survival, just because the way our societies began, that we're here because someone resisted. But also at the same time, and because both Firelei and I are part of like our production, the way we produce our work is born out of joy, also joy for the work and joy for the people, in this way that resistance can be memory, can be ancestral, but also can be joy. And as we're learning more recently, can be rest. I just, for example, finished reading Dana Williams's book about Toni Morrison as editor. And one of the things that she says very clearly is that when during the civil rights movements that had in the 60s, she couldn't go out because she had small children. But she referred to the way she participated in the struggle was through documentary keeping, publishing authors, publishing Angela Davis, publishing Muhammad Ali. So resistance can also be an act of archiving. And I think as migrants or children of migrants, especially in this current period where so much is being erased, that is also part of recording. Bearing witness is also a part of resisting.
That's beautiful. There's so many things to talk about now. So let's dive into this conversation. But I wanted to start actually with a question about form, because Firelei, you're an inveterate reader, and Edwidge, I know that you're thinking about visual culture all the time. So the first question I wanted to ask is, what do you think literature can do that painting can't?
Well, one thing that I feel like is always a gift, and to circle a little bit back on the theme of resistance, that one thing that both of our fields can do is create worlds. And in that act of envisioning, you don't just resist what has been, but you create windows for whole new ways of being, kind of go beyond the limits of perception. There is a line of, isn't it odd that we actively, when we're reading physical books, we're hallucinating over slices of trees. We're actively projecting ourselves into these worlds that have been so magically conjured by someone. And as someone who's constantly late or who's very time blind, I'm always leery of having any medium that is time bound. So that's why I love the two-dimensional image, for instance, or sculpture. You come in atemporally. So it's more of this almost puzzlement at how magical it is that you can create something that is both time bound, but also time freeing. A really brilliant author will make you feel so anchored into a particular moment. And you realize I have been past, present, future, past, present, future. As a reader, you're navigating, you're flipping through constantly. But a good writer just makes you do that smoothly. Like you're doing a thing of presence and disembodiment all at once. So that splicing for me feels like absolute magic that I am almost incapable of doing unless I am having a conversation.
Edwidge, how does painting accomplish things that literature cannot? And how do you think the two relate together, painting and literature?
Well, I'm always slightly envious of visual culture, and I think that's why I try to, when I can, sort of explore or delve into visual artists, because I think they do this powerful thing within a frame or a series of frame, and then Firelei's work is like a whole experience, right? It's like a full body experience. But we talk about sometimes the short story as a kind of painting where you can imagine what happened before, you can imagine what happens after, but while you're looking at the visual image, you're fully immersed. You're fully in this world. And then while it still leaves this possibility for you to insert yourself or for you to imagine what the next frame might be. So in that way, there's a kind of deeply collaborative effort that you're part of when you're looking at an image or when you're touching something we're not allowed to touch it, but you can imagine yourself touching it. So I think there's so much power in that. And even when I'm writing, I really try to actually have for myself a very clear visual image so that you can create that hallucination that Firelei was talking about for someone to participate in with you. Of course, they're bringing their own part to it, but I think with visual art, especially work like Firelei's work, you're immersed in it. You become part of it. You can take a dive into it.
Mm. Firelei, how are you reacting to what Edwidge just said?
No, that's absolutely my favorite audience is one that will co-create with me. It's like I give you half the composition and everything, your life experience, all your knowledge, your archive, your internal archive is a thing that's going to complete the work. So that means that you can create multiple works. Whereas with a book, I feel like you have parameters. I might have pronounced the character's name wrong because I'll come in with different languages. But when you're reading the book, you stick pretty close to that person's lived experience in a way that you're not meant to wander off into different rooms. I feel like in a painting, you create the infrastructure and people populate different rooms at will in sometimes ways that you don't expect or don't know, but are also exciting.
Edwidge, I wanted to ask you, because Firelei brought up temporality, about time, because it strikes me how your writing also moves between past and present and future, and sometimes even within the same paragraph, really fluidly. When you're telling the story of Haiti and the Haitian diaspora, are you offering a different way of thinking about time and about history and memory? That the telling is not just about the narrative, but it's also about giving tools for resistance, perhaps, like a way to push back against colonial frameworks and hold space for a more layered truth, kind of like what Firelei is doing in her paintings.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I think part of survival, like this idea of resistance or even survival, when we imagine it, is to try to construe a future. And especially in difficult times, to be able to imagine something beyond the moment that you live in. And I think when you think of the eradication of indigenous people on the lands where we come from, or people who were enslaved, I mean, they had to be able to imagine a future. And I think that's also what art does. It's a kind of dream. And for example, when I look at the women in Firelei's work with all their like the lushness like painted on them, you can imagine a past, but you can imagine a future also where using all the difficulties we face, where we could evolve as something else. You know, I have two daughters, and I have to be able to sort of project some positivity into their future. And when we create art, even as we're documenting the past, we also can draw lessons from these women like we both adore Ana Kauna, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what that kind of model means. Like, what was it about this person that allows us to still call out her name today? So that continuity is possible in art, whether it's visual art or literature. And I definitely try to explore that because at the same time, migrants are always looking back, but also we're here because most of us are thinking about the future for our children, right? So those two, that whole continuity is so powerful in art, especially as Firelei sometimes has to do it in one or a series of frames, right? To say so much with like a brush of paint. That's something I think is very powerful. Like you can feel the emotion on the canvas when you see it too.
Firelei, can you tell us who Ana Kaona is and why you chose her as a subject?
So hopefully I will not do disservice to her legacy. Ana Kaona, as far as I have learned of her history, was this cacique, this native chieftain at the meeting point when Columbus and his brother landed in Hispaniola in the island of Quisqueya, which in its ancestral name meant the land of mountains. And the story goes that Columbus's brother fell in love / lusted after Ana Kaona. Ana Kaona was married to a fellow chieftain, and Columbus gave her the option of either becoming the brother's mistress or death by fire. And she chose death by fire and sent a warning out to other islands of the violence. But I usually refer to Ana Kaona as this inflection point again, or as a palimpsest where we can then start gathering the histories of different geographies and consider our treatment of history, the environment, the female body, and how to, from that point, untangle different ways of being.
Thank you, Firelei. Nakaona is a symbol of resistance and a site where history and power and the body are converging. It feels very present right now. Edwidge, you've written about her too, and your work often challenges how official histories are told. So in this moment, when Black and brown bodies are being policed and documents are defining what belonging is, how are you navigating that in your writing? What does it feel like to work through that day to day?
I frankly find it very hard because I'm in the middle of writing a novel that is political. It's not sort of like a distant from the moment. Well, at the same time, I question the validity of what I'm doing. And, you know, going back to this idea of resistance, thinking like, is this the best use of my time to be wrapped up in this very elaborate, singular sort of personal endeavor? So I find myself questioning the work I'm doing a bit more. Like, is it better to go to a protest? Is it better to be writing something? Especially if you're teaching, you have like a very condensed period of time in which to do work that's not related to teaching. So that's a question I'm asking myself. I go back again to Toni Morrison doing the Bush era, who wrote this essay in the Nation magazine that's quoted a lot, where she said, you know, in a similar moment in time, she was feeling depressed and she's like, is this what I should be doing? And this friend reminded her that this is precisely when artists go to work. So I find myself trying to redefine what that work is. What is the best kind of balance of that? And is the work that we're doing, like if we finish this work and it gets seen, there's a bigger voice, does it quote unquote humanize the people that are being so dehumanized every day? Is our visibility as children of immigrants? Does that make it easier for the person who's being beaten down by ICE? We also have people we love who are vulnerable to these violences. So it's a little bit part of, like, before I dive into my work, I feel like I have this conversation all the time, like how to define what this work means for me, and also what it means for the collective, the people who on whose back I stand here, the people who brought me here, and the people who are still being brutalized and humiliated and dehumanized by this cruelty, this violence we're seeing on Black and brown bodies, but on immigrant bodies.
So it's like the duality of facing the crassness and the limited vision of the present. We're at a point how so much of what we consider scarcity now is so constructed that it is upon us to create that moment, the refraction that gets us to see the actual abundance that there is. I think one of the gifts of creatives, we have lots of limits, but in this imagining, in this boundless space of creation and a gift from the muses, we are able to open up windows. Within that mental space, there is also the ability to say we have the capacity to create worlds anew. I have this feeling that we're on this point where we have inherited several narratives of humanity is only capable of existing as a high culture within a period of 4,000 years. And I keep thinking that we have so many lessons and so much abundance. We are in a place where we have the capacity to harness resources in a way that can be more aligned with environment. We are in the Anthropocene, but that doesn't mean the world will end with us. So then how do we survive within that space? And not only how do we survive, how do we realign with environment so that we can thrive in it? Because our failure to thrive in it is purely self-made. We are at a lack of imagination. I feel like the imagination is boundless. The only limit is a budget. I have, as an artist, I have limitless ways of being and doing and creating and undoing. The studio is a laboratory for like absolute creation. And if anything, my biggest thing that I can do in the studio is to create moments of mental abundance, not as a point of escapism, not as a point of like, God, we got to check out, but like, we need to create moments of imagining so that we can get ourselves out of here.
I really love this idea of the boundless abundance as an act of resistance, because of course that's the gift of the imagination. But we're also, speaking to the current moment, this idea of perceived scarcity is used as a weapon. If a child born today in the United States doesn't have birthright citizenship, does that mean your child will have a better life? These acts of cruelty are being cheered on. People are reporting their neighbors to immigration.
Weaponized.
Right? And so the perceived scarcity, it's such a counter to also what these people who call themselves Christians, this idea of like seeing your neighbor as yourself. It is presented as these people are taking something away from you. Like if they disappear, your life will be glorious. So I really appreciated this. And I take great hope in this idea of that art at least offers that portal of endless possibilities, because we're going to need those kinds of acts of imagination, just as our ancestors did. As Firelei was talking, I was thinking of Nikki Giovanni, who talked about going to Mars. It's like, Black women going from the halls of slave ships where people hummed a song that allowed them to survive. And then the possibility of, as Nikki Giovanni put it, of like from there to like going beyond like even our present. And so I'm looking for hope wherever I can find it these days. That I felt like that was very hopeful.
We're almost out of time, sadly, but I wanted to ask this. Firelei, you opened our conversation today by asking us and inviting us to think about time and memory on a very long scale. But I also keep hearing from younger people and many others asking about the right now. So I'd love to hear from both of you on this question. How do you build a life around bearing witness and sparking imagination, especially given all the personal and structural obstacles that you are facing? Edwidge, you're smiling. I imagine you get this question a lot from your students.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because, at this moment in time, there's so much that shifting, even for young people. So I think like there's the uncertainty about creative work is even more so, and in this environment. So, but I always say faith, and now it seems like a daily task, right? To renew your faith in humanity, renew your faith in your neighbors, renew your faith in your ability to survive, right? I mean, it's like a daily commitment these days, right? There's so much unpredictability. There's so much hostility on Black and Brown and immigrant bodies. And we're all in communities where people we know or people we love are affected by policies, by this administration and so forth. So it's again like wrestling with that faith in creative work, but I think you have to look back to the past for it. Audre Lorde says we've been there before, and to renew that faith in survival and work, and also to remember, as we also had to be reminded that our survival has always been woven into creative work. The civil rights movement, people sang, artists were part of that. And so to believe in your ability to produce work, which might require a lot of imagination and joyful abundance, as Firelei said, but also to believe that there will be a future and we're certainly going to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. On my end, I would even say that community was always such a crucial part, like real world community, touch hand, touch grass, like real world tactile community was always the baseline for survival. If you had to go to work, you had the aunties who could take care of the babies. There are so many things that have been divested from our culture. The gains and losses of acculturation or a culture reaching like a high level of capital development, that there are so many things that you lose. You lose the family network, being able to take care of each other, someone to make the food, someone to get the different resources that are necessary for daily life. It becomes difficult when you're doing all of that on your own. So if at baseline you can build up more resilience by having real world community, make your own family, make those anew. At baseline, those are really important things. We are going to be more and more driven to be isolated and disassociated into a pleasurable scrolling of a device that is not going to feed us in the same way. That because we have eons of genetic development, at baseline, we have to acknowledge what those are. What are the carbon-based limits of our body that need to be fed and nurtured, and that they're not limits. It's not a meat suit. It's not something to be discarded. It is an incredible gift.
It's been such a gift to be in community with both of you today and to be inspired by your visions and your practices of resistance, of imagination, and of care. And perhaps it can help us to appreciate the long view of how folks have made it through the past and get us through this moment that we find ourselves in right now. Firelei Báez, Edwidge Danticat, thank you for joining us on Edge of Reason. I'm Jeff Chang, and you've been listening to Edge of Reason. Join us next week as we turn to the estate of the artist Louise Bourgeois. We'll be joined by curator Francis Morris and psychoanalyst Jameson Webster to reflect on the enduring legacy of Bourgeois' work, its influence, and the questions it continues to raise today. If you've enjoyed what you just heard, like and review us on Apple Podcasts and help spread the word about our series to other listeners like you.